My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be Glenn Gould, Video 4, The Phone Calls Number 3. This is my novel, Glenn Gould, Light and Dark. Okay, a novel by John Passfield, a picture of Glenn Gould with his hands becoming the keyboard. On the back of the novel, a summary. Glenn Gould's life as a musician begins as a fairy tale, as his very first recording, the Goldberg Variations, skyrockets the young Canadian to the top of the music world as a must-see and must-hear concert pianist with sold-out performances all around the world. And then, at the height of his powers and his popularity, he makes a decision about his music and his life, which splits the music world right down the middle and remains controversial to this day. Well, that's a topic for another video. It's certainly dealt with in the novel, but the topic for today is these phone calls that he makes to people. There are 7 phone calls in the novel. In each, the main character phones an unnamed acquaintance and presents an image. An image is an item of information which, because it's on a seemingly unrelated topic to the life of Glenn Gould, invites interpretation. So if this seems to have nothing to do with the life of Glenn Gould, why would he present this image? In this video reading, I'll read 2 of the 7 phone call images. So the piano is in chapter 10, page 91. Let's go to that. Okay, a little hard to find here, but here it is. Okay, so this is the image of the piano. So Glenn Gould phones a person. It's middle of the night, perhaps. Glenn Gould is restless, has an idea, would like to talk. A phone call to a friend. Let's say a person is accustomed to playing the piano. Any traditional piece, recreationally, of course. And then he suddenly stops playing. At first, he assumes he's going deaf. We can think of Beethoven, perhaps. But then he realizes that his piano is playing not notes all of a sudden, but playing words. Oh, he begins to play again and to listen closely. Yes, the piano is playing words. He begins to play again and to listen closely. Words he can barely hear, mind you, but certainly these are words. No longer does his piano play the notes of yesteryear. Now, would it not follow, logically speaking, that this fellow would feel an obligation by whatever personal honor system to which he presumably adheres to at least attempt to address this issue and to try to ascertain the actual words which his ear can barely hear? He plays, he listens, he plays. The words are tantalizingly near. The mystery of the other side of the membrane. By what means, then? Help me think here. Might he go about this quest, this Sherlock Holmesian argosy, in pursuit of whatever El Dorado is pressing to be heard? So that's the phone call about the piano. Let's look at the one about the gold coin. That's page 109, which I'll just get here. Okay, here we are. So we're going from page 91 to 109. That means a lot of imagery in the mind of Glenn Gould is not being read by me, but is certainly active in the mind of Glenn Gould when he thinks of these 2 images that he's expressing to another person. So chapter 12, page 109, the gold coin. Phone call to a friend. So let's say an old fellow is digging a hole. He's using a round-mouthed shovel. He's been digging all his life. Not digging a grave with a spade like they do in the movies. This would be clay, so it isn't easy going. The trick with clay is that you get a pail and keep pouring a little water into the hole as you go along. Clay when it's dry is like digging concrete. Clay when it's wet will slice like butter. So digging clay, you always want to keep it wet. Well, he's down to about waist deep when a neighbor comes by and asks him what he's digging for. And the old fella says, I'm going to dig my grave and bury this here gold coin. This coin will act as a comfort in my old age. He takes a gold coin from his pocket and holds it up. I'll put it down at the bottom and fill the hole again, and when I need it, I'll know the gold coin will be there for me. What a foolish thing to do, says the neighbor. When you're old, you'll have aches and pains. Your muscles will shrivel up. You'll be confined to bed. You won't be able to dig, and the coin at the bottom of your grave will be no use to you. I'll tell you what, the old fella says to his neighbor. When I get old, I'll lie right here beside my grave on a makeshift cot, and I'll tell my story to passing strangers. I'll tell them all about my gold coin lying 6 feet down. If someone digs it up for me while I'm still alive, then life will still be worth living. If everyone waits for me to die, I'll be better off dead. So that's the story of the gold coin. So we have the piano, excuse me, it makes my throat raw, and the gold coin has 2 images. So here's a note that I wrote about this. I don't know the current definition of the modernist novel. I've come to think that I've taken much of my conception of what a novel can be and should be from the modernist novels of the early 20th century, from about 1900 to 1930. However, I don't tend to concern myself with other people's definitions. I always make definitions of my own. That way I feel I can stay closer to my own thoughts rather than finding myself going off track on the mental rails of someone else. So I'd say that the modernist novel, the kind of modernist novel that I write, takes place inside the mind of a main character, or perhaps a number of main characters. Most of my novels take place inside the mind of one character, as does this one, Glenn Gould. However, a few of them take place inside the mind of 2 characters, and at least one of them takes place inside the mind of 3 characters, as presented in alternating chapters. So, this puts the main character, the novelist, and the reader in an interesting procession, though not in a hierarchy. So they're equal horizontally to each other. They're not in a hierarchy with one above the other. Here's an explanation. 3 points. Number 1. The main character is thinking his or her thoughts without any sense of an audience. That is why there's no narrator in any of my novels or novellas. The main character thinks his or her thoughts, Glenn Gould and his imagery, and that is that. Number 2. The novelist has the interesting position of being the creator and the arranger of the imagery of the character's thoughts, but can only interpret that imagery for himself without any knowledge of how the character is interpreting that imagery for himself or herself. So I don't know how Glenn Gould is interpreting that imagery. Number 3. Now the reader reads the novel, as it were, over the shoulder of the writer, John Passfield in this instance, and over the shoulder of the main character, Glenn Gould in this instance, and can only interpret that imagery, that is the imagery that is inside the mind of the main character, Glenn Gould, for himself or herself, for the reader's own self, without any knowledge of how the main character or the author, me, is interpreting that imagery. That's why they're horizontal. In the prose novel, they're vertical. The author knows more than the character, and what the author knows and the characters knows is presented to the reader. Here, in the poetic novel, they're horizontal. The author, the main character, and the reader all interpret, but they're equal. None has precedence. If this pleases you as a reader, you will like the modernist novel as I conceive of that form. If this does not please you, then I suggest you read the prose novels with a narrator, a surrogate for the author, who is placed between you, the reader, and the main character. The narrator in a prose novel will do two things. One, show you the imagery of the main character's thoughts, which the modernist novel also does. And number two, tell you what the imagery means to the main character and to the author, which the modernist novel does not do. Period. Okay, so this is my novel, Glenn Gould, Light and Dark, a novel by John Passfield. It's found on Amazon. There's information there. It's found on my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com. It's also found on my website, johnpassfield.ca. That is information about it. johnpassfield.ca. A planning notebook, which leads me, and if you read it, leads you through the writing process, planning and writing process, right up to the rough draft stage, and a reflective journal, which shows you my thoughts about many, many topics as I was polishing that rough draft. So have a look there for free access just by clicking on the icon on my website, johnpassfield.ca. Lastly, thank you for watching this video.